Good morning. I hope you're ready. It's going to be a busy few days. 3, 2, 1. Push the button. There's a huge event on the way. Not Eurovision or his big day, but their one.
Here it is.
A test for the Prime Minister and his party even bigger than that pothole. A huge set of elections across England, his first in charge.
The plan is working. Stick with us and we'll deliver it.
Maybe his last before the questions of the general election.
Do you think that the country deserves better?
Hi, everybody.
A moment the Lib Dems can get big wheels turning again.
On the 4th of May, the British people can send the Conservatives a very strong message that they're fed up with them.
The council elections determine who makes decisions about our towns and cities. But there's another big question it can help us to answer. So this morning, what state are our political parties in? In the Conservatives' corner, Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary. For Labour, not yet a household name perhaps, but one of the most important people inside the party, Shabana Mahmoud, the campaign coordinator. And what chance do these elections give the Greens? Their co-leader, Adrian Ramsay's here. And I'm sure you recognise her from Hollywood, but actress Nazanin Boniadi is here, not to talk about her superstar roles, but her family's homeland. The British-Iranian actress and activist joins us this morning. And we have a fabulous panel here at the Election Megadesk to keep a check on our interviews and look ahead to what promises to be a very eventful week. Friend of King Charles, Nicholas Soames, Bridgerton star Adwa Ando, and Matt Clifford, the chair of ARIA, the UK's new agency to advance technology and research. Good morning, all of that and a little bit of Eurovision later on. And we've been really overwhelmed by your responses to our conversations last week about what's happening in our schools. So we'll get to that later in the programme. But first of all, as ever, let's check in with the front pages. No surprise, several of them splash on the Coronation. The Mail there saying everyone will be invited to swear allegiance to the King. The Daily Mirror picks up on the security costs instead, but the Sunday Times also goes with that idea of this pledge of allegiance. On the next stack, the Sunday Telegraph is talking about Ron DeSantis, actually the American politician, but has a fabulous photograph of soldiers practicing for the coronation. But the Independent goes on pubs and clubs and what's happened to them since Brexit, and the Observer says Keir Starmer is promising to be more radical than Tony Blair. Maybe we'll get to that a bit later in the show. But first of all, people are now starting to talk a lot about the coronation. Nicholas Soames, Baron Soames now, I believe. You're one of the people who knows the King extremely well. What does this week mean, do you think, for him?
Well, it's a very solemn week. It is the coming together of the extraordinary, all the elements of kingship are brought together in the coronation. And it's a great unifying moment, or should be a great unifying moment. And I'm sure will be a great unifying moment, bringing together the past, the present and the future. So it's something that he would take, obviously, immensely seriously, very straightforwardly, but very seriously and very profoundly. And
there will be all sorts of symbolism and pageantry. We can see there the huge sceptre with, these incredible jewels. But in building up to that moment, and of course, because he's taken the throne at a certain point in his life, do you think he's nervous?
Well, I think anyone approaching this sort of thing would be possibly a bit nervous, but it's something that members of the royal family, he's schooled to it. He was a serviceman, he's been an airman, he's been a naval officer, he's quite used to coping with this sort of stuff, but it is very, very big indeed. And what I think is so romantic about it is that he is going to be crowned in the same Abbey Church as was William the Conqueror, where Elizabeth I was crowned 400 years before his mother was crowned. This is a sort of timeless ceremony, and it's something of great national and historic importance.
Adrian, do you think, though, it will be a unifying moment? Because there is also a lot of conversation going on at the moment about re-examining the UK's role in history, and, you know, it's fair to say, important to say also, not everybody is a fan of the monarchy.
Absolutely, that's all of that is true, Laura, but it's a great moment in our nation's history. Whether you are a Republican, whether you want to downsize monarchy, whatever you feel about this country's past, we are where we are. And I think Charles, I've met him at the Royal Shakespeare Company, so I know he's a great supporter of the arts. He's been banging the drum for the environment forever. He's made an absolute point of making this a moment where faiths are welcomed into everything that's happening. I think he has a sense of the variety and interest that this nation now holds, and I feel that in that context, it's a very particular moment, and it will be a moment of great reflection. Of course, it will. But I think it's a hugely interesting moment for us all.
So you two are both, I suppose, fully on board with the coronation and its importance. Matt, we're going to talk a lot about your job a bit later in the programme, but just, I suppose, maybe unfair to do this, but as a representative of a younger generation, do you think people are caring less about monarchy as time goes on?
Well, I think actually the Queen's death last year, I think for a lot of people reawakened an interest and a sort of curiosity maybe of a kind of important part of our national life. I think, I have two young children, and actually for them, that moment was a really important moment to talk about our country's history and our future, and I'm hoping that what we're about to see next week is another one. Okay, well, all three of you, thank you very much for now. Plenty of hard work for you a bit later in the programme, so do stick with us, but hard work for someone else, because last time he was here, the Transport Secretary told us and the long-suffering travelling public, all of you, that he would facilitate and hammer out a deal to stop the train strikes, but it didn't work out, and Mark Harper faces now more strikes on the way. And if you're getting your sequins ready to get to Liverpool for the Eurovision contest on May the 13th, don't try and get the train. Or if you're planning to go to the FA Cup final on the 3rd of June, they might not be working properly then either. Mark Harper is back with us this morning, as you can see. Welcome to the programme.
Good morning.
Now, last time you were here, you said, I will facilitate hammering out a deal on the strikes. It's failed, hasn't it? You've failed.
No, I said I would facilitate fair and reasonable pay offers being made to the trade unions, Laura, and that's exactly what I did. And the fair and reasonable pay offer that Network Rail made to their staff was put by the RMT to their members, and it was overwhelmingly accepted. 90% turnout. 76% voted in favour of it. What is inexplicable to me is that a very similar offer has been made by the train operating companies through their grouping, the Rail Delivery Group. It's been put to the RMT executive, and for the third time, the RMT executive won't put it to their members, and instead have called strikes which are cynically targeting the Eurovision Song Contest, as you've said. Now, the reason why that's so appalling is it's not our song contest. We're hosting it for Ukraine. And I've met the head of Ukrainian Railways. Putin's targeting Ukrainian Railways. There are hundreds of Ukrainian Railway staff who've been killed. What we should be doing is being in solidarity with them and not targeting
your role and
an event.
And the train company's role in all of this, and the government's role, because you do have responsibility here too, is about making sure that there is an agreement that can be reached, so that not just people going to Eurovision, but people watching this programme can get their journeys back to what they expect. And the fact is that the train unions are not ready to accept the deal that you've put on the table. 4%, 5%, half of inflation, along with what they would say are significant changes to how they're expected to work, and also they would say some changes to safety for passengers.
Well, look, a couple of things. First of all, a fair and reasonable pay offer has been made, and look, you have to take my word.
Well, it's fair and reasonable. It's half inflation.
But the same value pay offer was put by the RMT to their members that work on Network Rail, and their members voted for it, 90% turnout, 76% in favour. So that's not my judgment. So that suggests to me the members did think it was fair and reasonable, a pay offer with a reform package. The RMT executive won't put the same offer to their members. It seems to me that if you're a trade union leader, you work for your members, put the offer to your members. It's a fair and reasonable offer. And by the way, the reforms are not unreasonable. They're about a railway that works 7 days a week.
That you know.
you know, that's not an unreasonable reform package.
But you know that the
and it's a
RNT
decent pay
executive
offer.
has looked at the conditions attached, which also relate to next year's pay offer, and they believe actually that the deal has been reneged on. But I think for many people watching this morning...
The RDG have made that very clear. It hasn't been reneged on. It's a very fair deal. They've been considering it for several weeks. They should put it to their members and let their members
And you've
decide.
made that point. But the point for many of our viewers watching this morning as well is whether it is the rail unions or whether it is the nursing union or the teachers union, both of them have said in this studio in the last few weeks, they are prepared to strike potentially till Christmas rather than accept what's on the table. Now, as a government, are you prepared to go on like this with the disruption for passengers, patients, and also from all sorts of members of the public, parents who are losing out in their kids in the classroom with strike disruption? Are you prepared as a government to let this all go on until Christmas because you won't budge on the money?
Well, look, let me just pick up the health service one. I mean, that's interesting. Again, we made what we think is a fair and reasonable pay offer. It has been accepted. You've obviously picked up on the nurses where it hasn't, although it's worth saying their leadership recommended that offer to their members. But, you know, Unison members have accepted that pay offer. GMB members have accepted the pay offer. And the Secretary of State's going to have all of the unions, I think, on Tuesday at the NHS Staff Council.
But my
They'll
question
formally
is,
report to him.
are you prepared as a government to go on like this until Christmas?
Well, they'll formally report to him on Tuesday, and he'll then have to make a decision about whether he's going to implement the pay deal that's been offered. He said he stands ready to do that, but he's got to wait for that formal
But
readout
this isn't
on
just
Tuesday.
about one union. This is about parents, patients, passengers. Are you as a government prepared to go on like this with disruption for the public in all sorts of ways until Christmas?
Well, look,
because some of the unions are.
On the rail unions, which is the one I'm specifically responsible for, we have done what I said we would do. We've played our part. There's a fair and reasonable pay offer on the table. And I think the unions should put it to their members. You know, take the train drivers.
I'm
Average
asking
salary
you what
60.
you're going to do about it as a government, because it sounds like then you don't want to budge anymore, and that's your decision to take. So you don't want to budge. That means then for our viewers this morning, this might go on for months and months and months.
Well, look, I think in the end, the people that work in those industries have got to make a judgment about whether they accept the pay offer. It'd be nice if they were given the opportunity to make a decision on it.
And you've made that point.
Also, I want there to be, and I
times.
think I said this to you when I was here before, I want a successful rail system that recovers from the disruption that it had during the pandemic, when, by the way, billions of pounds of taxpayers' money went in to protect it and to protect the workers in it. All that the rail unions are going to do are drive people away from it. You take the two big events they're trying to disrupt, the Eurovision and the FA Cup final. My sense is our fantastic bus and coach sector will step up.
Well, you can get there in your ministerial car. The Prime Minister might get there in a helicopter or a private plane, he seems fond of
the bus and coach sector will step up and do their very best to step in to support people. That's just going to damage the rail industry. So my plea is fair and reasonable pay offers are on the table.
Well, let's talk about...
They have been accepted by some aspects of the system. They should be put to the members so that they can vote on them.
OK. You said there you want to see a successful railway. People watching this morning, particularly in the parts of the north of England this morning, know there is one service that has been extraordinarily unsuccessful, TransPennine Express. Now, in the next few days, you have to decide whether or not they get their contract renewed. Given the level of disruption, the level of service, how can you possibly contemplate giving them another go?
Well, look, two things. I've made one decision in the past, and I've got one more to make, not yet made. So, Avanti West Coast also had problems. I had to make a decision. In that case, it had delivered significant performance improvements.
So we're asking today about TransPennine.
And so I made that decision because I felt they had demonstrated they've improved for passengers. And actually, since I made that decision, services have continued to get better.
I think not every passenger is happy with what they're doing, but are you going to renew TransPennine?
On TransPennine Express, what I've got to do is make a decision that is legally defensible. So there's a limit to what I can say today. But I'm very clear. I've listened carefully to the feedback from passengers, from my colleagues on both sides of the House of Commons. I've met with the senior executives from the company. What I've got to do is think about what the best thing is for passengers. And I've made it clear in Parliament and on the media, no option is off the table.
Including not renewing their contract?
Yeah, no option is off the table, but I've got to make a decision that is legally defensible. So sitting here today, I've got to be careful about what I say, but I look at all of the facts and no option is off the table.
Another decision that successive ministers have had to take about transport is about HS2. Now I want to show you and viewers this morning what HS2 was originally going to look like. I think we can show the original planned route. Look at all those phases stretching right across the country, but then this happens. That bit disappears or is delayed, and essentially the line now, as predicted, is going to be a fraction of what it was expected to be, maybe not even getting into central London. Old Oak Common, a place in West London that lots of our viewers have probably never heard of, might be the end of this multi-billion-pound railway line. Are you a bit embarrassed when you look at that map, what that was meant to be and what it's ending up as?
Well, no, because that isn't what it's ending up of. People can see there it says phase 1. That is phase 1. We haven't resolved from the next part to it. We've committed to delivering it from Manchester to Euston. What I've had to do is...
Years and years and years later than promised.
What I've had to do is to make some sensible decisions, given the level of inflation, about making sure we balance the cost of a taxpayer about getting it delivered. Phase 1, which is in construction at the moment, and anyone that goes and has a look at Birmingham, for example, they can see all the development around Curzon Street Station, making a massive impact, a positive impact on the economy. There are tens of thousands of people working on it. That piece of it, we wanted to keep going as fast as possible to get it constructed.
This was meant to soon reach right across much of England.
We've had to slow down by 2 years, the middle section of it, and then we're back on track again on the piece to Manchester. So you have to balance these things, but we're very committed to it, not just for delivering high-speed rail, but what it also does is frees up capacity on the West Coast Main Line, enabling better passenger services on that line and, importantly, more freight services to get freight off of our roads and onto trains, which is better for our net zero and decarbonisation targets.
And can you, as the Transport Secretary today, guarantee that this line will actually go all the way to London Euston, even if it takes until 2041?
We've committed to doing that, but look, we are looking at the design for Euston Station again. The design that was on the table was too expensive, and one of the things I've got to do is deliver great infrastructure,
well, that sounds
but
like
conscious
a yes,
of the cost of the taxpayer. No, it's a yes. It is going to go from Euston to Manchester, and we've said that the Euston station to Old Oak Common piece will open at the same time as the route through to Manchester. That's when you need the capacity, and that's what we've committed to doing. And
by
both
what year?
The Prime Minister and the Chancellor and myself have made that very clear.
By what year?
Well, it means it's delayed by a couple of years from its original in-service date. We haven't set out a precise date yet. We're going back through the design work, but the commitment for running the line from Euston to Manchester is there from the Prime Minister down.
Okay, let's talk then about something else that's been happening this week. We've all seen very distressing events happening in Sudan. There has been an evacuation of British nationals there. There was criticism that it was too slow to begin with, but it has now got, I think, about 1,800 people out. The last flight's now left. If Brits are still there, what should they do?
Well, look, I think it's worth just saying one or two words on the evacuation. It's the longest and most extensive evacuation of any Western nation. So, as you said, 1,888 British nationals have been evacuated, and it was important we took the time to plan to do that properly. It's not without risk. There was an attack a couple of days ago on a Turkish aircraft, so I think I should just say a big thank you to our military and other personnel who've been in Sudan, making sure we get those British nationals out.
There now, what should they do?
For those British nationals who've chosen to stay in Sudan, we're delivering consular support from Port Sudan, and we've got British personnel there. We've got up-to-date travel advice on the Foreign Office website, which people should look at, which looks at the different routes out of the country if people want to leave. So we're going to continue doing what we can do, but of course we can't deliver the flights out anymore, given that we've reached the end of the ceasefire. That's why we were clear through the week that British nationals that wanted to leave should have made their way to the airport so that we could have evacuated them from the country.
Okay, and I just want to quickly ask you about a couple of other things. We know the local elections are coming on Thursday. It's a big moment, maybe not the hugest moment in the political cycle, but they really do matter. What's a decent result for the Conservatives? Greg Hanstall has said on the record, we might lose 1,000 seats. One of your opponents told me that's preposterous. So what's a decent result?
Well, look, we're fighting, as you would expect, we're fighting for every vote because Conservative councils deliver better services with lower council taxes, and that's why we'll continue to make those arguments.
So what's a decent result then?
We're not in the forecasting business, but if you look at what independent forecasters are saying, so not us, but those, all the psephology experts, they're sort of pitching it, suggesting that we might lose 1,000 seats. So that's what they're saying. That's not what we're saying.
Well, it's what some of them are saying, and not everybody accepts that consensus.
But that's what they're saying. So look, we're going to fight for every vote because I want as many Conservative councillors as possible because they deliver better services at lower council taxes than their political opponents, and that's why I think everybody should vote Conservative where they're voting on Thursday.
Well, we'll hear from Labour in a second, but the coronation, of course, is fast approaching. Will you do what the public are going to be offered to do next Saturday and make their own Pledge of Allegiance? Will you do it?
Yes, and of course all members of Parliament have done that already. So when His Majesty became King, most members of Parliament actually retook the oaths that we take to His Majesty, and I'm very happy to do that again. I think, as your panel said, I think the coronation is going to be a fantastic moment for the country, to bring the country together, to unite around the crown, and I think a fantastic advertisement of our nation across the entire world. Hundreds of dignitaries coming into the country, big opportunity for Britain. Okay, I'm sure none of them will be getting the train. Mark Harper, thank you very much for coming into the studio this morning. Now we're going to talk to Labour's Shabana Mahmoud in a few minutes. But if you were watching last week, you'll have seen our interview with the Ofsted boss, Amanda Spielman. We had such a huge response from you. We wanted to share some of it with you this morning. From teachers and parents alike, time and again, we heard words like fear, safety, mental health. We were told of a culture of fear surrounding inspections for all staff. The expectations were just too much, one of you told us. Another viewer said that the system was actually damaging the mental health of people at school and the education of pupils themselves. Let's hear from Andy, a teacher who got in touch, who was recently inspected.
After seeing your show last week, I wanted to say that my experience of Ofsted was not pleasant. It was like being interrogated and cross-examined in a courtroom with question after question being fired at speed. It hasn't improved the teaching and learning in my department. We weren't given specific feedback in terms of how we could improve the teaching and learning in our classrooms, so for me it wasn't a useful experience.
But it was not all one-way traffic. One of you told us that Ofsted is there to protect children, and I think a single word assessment, how schools are judged, is currently suitable. Another of you said most schools are satisfied with Ofsted's view of them, or they accept the criticism as a constructive wake-up. We also heard from some of the parents from Caversham Primary, the school that was led by the head teacher Ruth Perry, who took her own life after its inspection. One of them told us, we don't care about the Ofsted rating. We want to know that people at our school care about our children. One of the other parents at Caversham still views the school as outstanding, despite Ofsted's inadequate rating. And they're calling for an inspection system that they want to treat parents like adults and doesn't rely on those single word judgments. We also talked with Amanda Spielman about children who didn't go back to school full time after COVID, those so-called ghost children. Now, she told us she was very worried about them. So are some of you. The parents of one of those so-called ghost children got in touch, and she said, as the mother of one, there has to be more and better provision for children who cannot cope in school. Thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences, and we will keep talking about this issue. So many of you obviously care passionately. So keep in touch, Kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk, or on social media you can use the hashtag. Now, as promised, with me now, a few days ahead of the local elections, is Labour's National Campaign Coordinator, Shabana Mahmoud. Welcome to the studio for the first time. Great to have you here. Now, Labour's talking about housing today, the closing stage of this campaign. And you're saying you'd bring back targets to get houses built in local areas that Rishi Sunak scrapped. But on its own, just having targets wouldn't actually get houses built. So how would you make sure it happened?
Well, we have to make sure that we're meeting local housing need. One of the worst things about what Rishi Sunak did, he snuck that announcement out just before Christmas last year, is removing the targets but without any kind of viable alternative in place. And that means that actually millions of people are now going to be locked out of being able to buy a home. We know people are desperate to get on the housing ladder, and we're simply not building enough homes in the country. So removing the targets, effectively abolishing the targets without a viable alternative, is the wrong approach. We would bring back those targets because whilst there's a conversation to be had about the exact formula and how the targets are actually reached, they are absolutely necessary to make sure that homes are built, and it's got to sit within a wider package of reform of planning and the way that we do development in this country to make sure that that those houses are actually built.
But how does having targets on a piece of paper actually get spades in the ground, bricks laid, and then people into new houses?
Well, the targets set, but they're supposed to be, they no longer are, but they're supposed to be binding targets on local authorities in order to get houses built to meet local housing need. Obviously, the target alone can't achieve that. There has to be the political will to drive that through and to drive that forward. That's why we're saying we would bring the targets back. We would have conversations with local authorities about maybe how the targets are set, but we would absolutely have those targets in place. And then we would also have other reforms to our planning framework in our country to make sure that in fact the target alone actually does deliver the houses as well, because in the end this is about housing need and making sure homes are built in our country. It's something that our country has failed to do for many years, and we've got to stop putting that right.
But would you force councils to build new homes? Because again, you're talking about conversations and targets, which may or may not be the right thing to do. But would you force councils to build new homes?
Well, we have to build homes. We have to build homes. So we've got to stop having a system whereby developments don't happen because speculators have bought land and are sitting on it waiting for the price to rise. We've got to stop having a system where, effectively people can block housing in their area. Local housing need has to be.
Do it?
We will get housing built. We will get housing built, whether you consider that being forced or not. We're going to get houses built in our country because we are going to have a wider package of reforms around the planning system to make sure that that system tilts the process in favour of getting homes built. It will involve local people a lot earlier in the process to make sure they're part of the design for their areas, assuming always that housing need has to be met. So the question is not, are we going to build homes? The thing that will be debated with local people and with local authorities is where those homes are and make sure that they are in the places that people want and need them.
You've said that first-time buyers would get first dibs, to use the party's phrase, on new developments. I mean, what does that actually mean? And why would a first-time buyer, maybe with no kids, no dependents, or nobody they're caring for, get priority over a family that might be crammed into a tiny flat and desperately needs a bigger house?
Well, it's about ensuring that people can actually get on the housing ladder, and first-time buyers we know are particularly struggling. So the point around the first dibs policy is actually to try and tilt the system in favour of those who simply cannot get a home and are desperate to own to have a home ownership. It's about making sure that the rules are in place in order to favour within the system first-time buyers. It's about stopping foreign speculators, for example, buying huge amounts of developments off plan often, even before they've been built, and keeping that stock and holding on to it so that the prices rise.
I'm just trying to understand though, what would that mean? So if you go to the estate agent as a first-time buyer, do they say, oh yeah, sure, you're going to be able to buy this house more easily than someone who might be offering £5,000 more?
It's about legislative reform to tilt the favour and to make sure that first-time buyers get those, as we call it, first dibs. It's about making sure that you prevent those properties from being available to people who are not first-time buyers. That would be through regulations and changing on our regulatory framework.
So could that mean then banning people from selling their homes to people who aren't first-time buyers, and actually, telling homeowners or telling a private builder, no, you can't sell that house to someone, you've got to sell it to them? That's a pretty big intervention, isn't it?
Well, it's a big intervention to say, for example, foreign speculators can't buy developments, no matter how much the developers might want to sell them to those speculators off-plan and then hoard those properties, preventing first-time buyers in this country from being able to get on the housing ladder. So yes, it is a big intervention. It is deliberately a big intervention because our housing market does not work. We're not building enough homes, and the homes that we are building are often bought up off plan long before any local person can get their hands on it. So we want to change that system and make sure that the dream of home ownership can reach more people in our own country.
So you would use the law to put people who'd never been able to afford a property before at the top of the queue, and you would essentially then ban other people from being able to buy some properties?
We're making no apologies for the fact that we want to privilege in our system first-time buyers in our own country.
What about something more radical that you might actually have a quicker effect, and some of your colleagues believe in? So the London Mayor and Labour in Scotland wanted a rent freeze, and actually it happened in Scotland, although it's now being tweaked, but the London Mayor wants the power to do it. A big part of what's going on with housing now is rent increases year after year, month after month, in ways that are really unmanageable for many people. So why not freeze rents? That'd be more radical, wouldn't it?
Well, look, a policy has to, obviously any policy that we have has to be fully funded and costed. We're not looking at rent freezes because actually the reason that the housing market is broken is because we're simply not building enough homes in this country. That's pushing rents up as well. So you have to unlock the blockage at source, and it is a national disgrace that we're not building enough homes in our country. But also, we've got the impact of the budget that the government had in autumn, which has also created a mortgage penalty for people all over our country, and that's been passed on to renters as well.
But on the changes that you're talking about to put first-time buyers to the top of the list, to try to unlock house building, those are things that would need changes to the law. It would take a long time. Whereas right now, we know from our emails we get to this programme, and we all know from people that we know, friends and family, rents are increasingly unaffordable. A simple policy that lots of people in your party are quite interested in, including the London Mayor and the Scottish Labour leader, think freeze rents, do it now. People can't manage. Why not?
A better policy that would actually get to the heart of the problem that we're trying to fix will be building homes, making sure that there is the housing supply in place, and then making sure that the people who need to buy those homes, particularly first-time buyers and local people, get first dibs, have the chance to get on the housing ladder. In the end, that is the way to fix the problem, because the problem is structural and it's deep and it's long-lasting and it has existed for many years, and that is fundamentally the only way around the problem. Everything else is a tweak to the system that might be a good temporary measure, but it won't get to the heart of the problem.
But all of those things, though, that you're talking about, and many people would say there are deep, long-running problems in the housing market, but all of the things you're talking about would take time. So essentially what you're saying to people is a Labour government wouldn't give immediate help to people who can't pay their rent at the moment.
Well, a Labour government would immediately prioritise actually tackling the cost of living crisis and all the other things that are putting pressure on household budgets, which are making life difficult for renters and for home owners, full stop. But ultimately, we will prioritise making the changes to the national planning framework and also our housing market to make sure we deal with the problem at source.
And you are in charge of the local election campaign. You did a powerful job as Labour's campaign coordinator. We had a go with Mark Harper, who was coy about putting a number on how he hoped the Tories might do. But one of your colleagues told me that with 500 seats, Labour would be cracking open the champagne. 400 is another number that's been put out there by some party sources. Is 400 a decent night for you?
Look, I mean, actually what I'm looking at in these local elections is where those councillors are being elected. I'm very pleased with the campaign that we're running. We've been focusing on the cost of living crisis. That's a number one issue facing families all over our country. So I'm going to be looking not just at the number of councillors, but actually where they are.
But
because I'm looking to make
I'm
looking to make progress on our road to the next general election. And so there is a huge crossover between some of the seats that are being contested in this local election that also impacts on the seats we need to win in the general election. So I'm looking at that, and if those 400 are in the areas that I want them to be, that's a good night for the Labour Party.
Okay, so it's where, not how many for
it's
you. And just finally, we asked Mark Harper as well. Everybody's beginning to talk about the coronation a bit, and the palace is offering everyone a chance to pledge their own allegiance to the King on Saturday afternoon. Will you do that, watching along?
Well, I think it's a lovely idea to involve the people instead of a homage of the peers, is what I think it used to be. It's now of the people. I think that's a lovely touch. Actually, like all members of Parliament, I've already sworn my allegiance to the King. I'm a practicing Muslim. I did that on my holy book, the Holy Quran, and I was very proud to do so, and I'll be joining in at the weekend as well.
You'll be doing it on Saturday. Well, thank you for being here this Sunday. It's great to have you in the studio for the first time, Shabana. Thank you very much for coming in. Now, we've heard from the politicians. You know that we want to hear from you. Let's now hear from our panel who've been listening along. Conservative peer, Nicholas Soames, Bridgerton star, Lady Dansbury. I want to call you Lady Dansbury, but I'll call you Adrian Ando, and Matt Clifford, who is the chair of the government's new agency for science and technology. Now, it's interesting there, Matt, we talked about this idea of pledging allegiance at the coronation. Do you think people will actually do that in large number? You know, sitting at home, watching along, or watching the coronation in the pub? I saw a suggestion this week, that people will be expected to do it.
I suspect a lot of people will. I think there's I think there is a big sort of undercurrent of patriotism in this country. And as Nicholas said, at the start, I think a lot of people will see it as, more than about a particular person, but about a history and a future and a set of institutions that I think we can be proud of.
There's been huge drama, though, in that institution. And we know that, King Charles, since he and his Queen Camilla, have taken the throne, huge drama. Huge family strife. Adwa, I know that you think he's a big supporter of the arts, but do you think there are sort of, I suppose, risks to the royal family with all the family drama that goes on?
I think we're all human beings, aren't we? I think the royal family are human beings in a goldfish bowl. Just as we all have to navigate our families, so the royal family have to. And they have enormous pressures on them, and they are raised in a particular way to understand that those pressures will be on them, but they are still human beings.
And do you think, Nicholas Soames, are you happy that Harry is coming to the coronation after all of the drama?
I think it would be very sad if he didn't come to the coronation to support his father. But families, all our families, all of us have, it's not easy for anyone really, and but this isn't a day about that. I think I think people will be surprised at how they're swept along on this extraordinary bywave of ceremony and music, magnificence, which we haven't seen in this country since the coronation, really, of the last Queen. And don't forget, it's very much the hope of Churchill at the Queen's coronation. This would open a great new era, the new Elizabethans, which it proved to be the case. And I am very optimistic about the future. It looks very difficult, I know, but I still think that this is a golden moment and we should grasp it.
And what are you doing on Saturday? Will you be there?
I'm very, very honoured to have been asked.
You look forward to it?
I am. Can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to it.
To go back to the family drama though, Adra, your new play, you are doing something really interesting. You are playing Richard III.
Yes.
Now I think we can have a little clip of what that's going to look like.
Yes.
Tell him, and spare not. Look, what I have said, I will avouch in presence of the king. I dare adventure to be sent to the Tower for it. 'Tis time to speak. My pains are quite forgotten.
Out, devil! I do remember them too well. Thou killedst my husband, Henry, in the Tower.
What an interesting thing to do. I mean, of course, that's a real violent, dramatic period of our history. But do you think there is a Shakespearean element to what has been going on with the royals?
Well, Richard III, you can look at Richard III from one perspective as the family drama. You can see the younger brother of Edward IV. He fought in the trenches, as it were, with his brother at Tewkesbury to get the crown from Henry VI. Then he marries Elizabeth Woodville, and Richard is sort of parked to one side. He's a soldier who comes home from war. What does he do in peacetime? His brother's attention is elsewhere. He feels betrayed by his brothers Clarence and his brother Edward. He hates Margaret. Margaret was responsible for the death of his younger brother Rutland. There's a lot of... his mother doesn't like him. There's a lot of, mummy love me. It's the complications of family and for him thinking that power will solve everything for him. I think we have a different sort of focus with our current king. It's not grasping of that sort of power. There is soft power. There is international conversation that happens in a different way that Charles can exercise.
And just quickly, if Shakespeare was writing about today's royal family, who would the main character be? Who'd be the most interesting one to explore?
Oh my goodness, there are so many characters who have the complexity of a Shakespearean character, the heroes and the villain all wrapped in one person.
I can see, Nicholas, your brain started whirring and then you gave a little smile. Who would your main character be?
Oh, well, I think that Shakespeare would write about the king.
There we are.
The king is a great, like Adra, steeped in Shakespeare and in the cultural history of the roots of this country.
Right, let's look at the future of this country. So, Matt, quickly, you started for 10. Tell us what ARIA, the agency that you chair, does.
Yeah, I think the way to think about ARIA is it's a bet on the extraordinary technical and scientific talent that we have in this country. I spent the last 12 years building a business called Entrepreneur First that invests in technical talent in this country, and over that period we've built businesses worth over $10 billion. And what I see...
$10 billion, did you say? Sorry, I just wanted to check for the audience. You said that quite quickly there, $10 billion.
And what I see in ARIA is a sort of parallel bet that's saying, actually, in this country, we have some of the world's greatest scientific institutions. We have some of the world's best researchers. How do we unleash them? How do we unleash them and fund them in ways that unlock breakthroughs for the UK and for the world?
One thing, though, that raised a lot of eyebrows in the world of technology this week was the decision in this country by the authorities not to allow Microsoft to buy a gaming business, Activision. And the boss of Microsoft essentially said, well, that means the UK is not a good place to do business anymore. I want to do business in the EU, not the UK. And what did you make of that kind of warning?
Well, the case itself is very complex, and I'm not an expert in it, and I think it's genuinely finely balanced. What I would say is, what I hear from people in UK tech is actually is very, very mixed. You know, there are some people that say, yeah, of course there is a chilling effect on investment if people believe they can't get a return. But let's remember, this is a $2 trillion company trying to buy a $70 billion company. There's actually a lot of startups that say, well, actually what I need to succeed is a vibrant competitive market. And if big tech consolidates everything, then it's hard to win there. So I don't think it's anything like as black and white as maybe Microsoft would have you believe.
The interesting thing about this, though, is you've got a massive business looking at the UK overall and saying, I don't really fancy being there anymore. I mean, does that not worry you as someone who's trying to promote tech businesses in the UK?
Well, I think we should see how that actually plays out. I'm sort of sceptical that that Microsoft is done with the UK, but we'll see. I mean, I think the point, though, is what do we want to have in this country? We want to have a vibrant domestic technology ecosystem where, you know, ideally in the future, the $2 trillion company doing the buying is a British company, not the $70 billion company doing the selling.
And you're very optimistic, obviously, about the future. But one thing also we've talked about here is artificial intelligence and both its huge opportunity, but also its big risks. And a tech billionaire, Jan Tallinn, told us a couple of weeks ago that he genuinely believes that the path of very high-end AI might actually end up sort of destroying humanity. Now, you talk to the people who run these AI labs. Can you tell us, when they speak to you, should we feel reassured or should we actually be frightened by the potential if this all goes wrong?
Well, I think it's genuinely both, and I think there's some good news there. So as well as some real risks. So absolutely, the people who run these labs are trying to build probably the most powerful technology in the history of our species. They're trying to build technology that will effectively be able to automate, you know, all cognitive labor and, you know, be better than humans at everything humans do. And if that doesn't excite you a little bit and terrify you a little bit, then there's probably something wrong with you. Now, the real challenge is that we are advancing the capabilities of these systems faster than we're advancing our ability to control them. Now, what does that require? Well, it requires investment on the control and the safety side. And one of the other things I've been involved in is the new AI task force that the government announced this week, which is really about the UK investing in its own capabilities in this space.
And is it adequate?
Well, one thing I was really pleased about, and you know, I think that, you know, everyone should see as an encouragement, is that right at the heart of that announcement was the idea of safe AI, the idea that the UK will be investing in safe, reliable, robust systems. And so, you know, I think there's a lot of talk at the moment about regulation. That's obviously an important part of the puzzle. But we must remember that it's not actually on its own adequate. What we really need to do is invest in the technology to make AI safe.
And just finally, I want to just briefly ask you, Nicholas, about the next hunt for the chair of the BBC. There's a cartoon in the Sunday Times this morning showing Rishi Sunak with the huge Boris Johnson just glowering around the corner. This comes, of course, after Richard Sharp, who was the old boss of Rishi Sunak and also somebody who knew Boris Johnson, had to quit at the end of last week because he put a friend who wanted to act as a loan guarantor in touch with the Cabinet Office, supposedly, according to reports, to help Boris Johnson with his financial predicament. Now, Nicholas, you've been around politics for a long time. How much of a problem do you think this is, this sort of whiff of cronyism around all of this?
Well, I think it's always a problem if it's obviously badly done. I feel sorry that Richard Sharp has had to go because I think he was beginning, and by common consent, was beginning to do a very good job here. But it is clear that the due process was not followed in the way that it should have been. And therefore, I think first of all, I think he was right to resign. I thought that the Guardian's cartoon of Richard Sharp was utterly contemptible and vile. And I think if we get into that sort of muddle, we really are in bad water. But there is a due process, and we will go through it. I mean, the Prime Minister will ultimately, I imagine, approve the appointment, but they will go through it utterly scrupulously, and this wouldn't happen again. And I am greatly in favour. I am greatly in favour of all these great appointments being done without any political involvement at all. They've got to be absolutely above any criticism.
Okay, thank you all very much for now. Fascinating insights from you, but we'll be back with you a bit later because now we're going to talk about something we've been watching carefully for a very long time. Take a look at this. Those are images from Iran last September. Women celebrating, burning their headscarves and dancing in the streets. That is breaking the rules. The regulations that have governed the lives of everyone in the country since a revolution in 1979 put a hardline Islamist government in charge. Since then, women have had to wear a headscarf, can't leave the country without their husband's permission. They're not even allowed to go to the football. But dissent burst into the open when, in the autumn, a 22-year-old woman, Mahsa Amini, died after being arrested by the morality police in Iran. Women and men all over the country took to the streets. It was the most serious challenge to the authorities in a very, very long time. But the government's answer was a brutal crackdown. Yet many ordinary men and women are determined to keep fighting for a better way of life. One of those people is Hollywood star Nazanin Boniadi. Her family fled Iran when she was a tiny baby. But far from being content with starring in the Rings of Power, Homeland or How I Met Your Mother on screen, she spends her time campaigning to try to bring more freedoms to Iran. And I'm delighted that she is here with us in the studio today. Nazanin, welcome and thank you for giving us your time. We are now more than 6 months on from the beginning of the start of these protests. What can you tell us about daily life for women in Iran right now?
Well, I just spoke to a prominent dissident just yesterday, female dissident inside Iran. And as you know, girls are still experiencing gas attacks in schools just yesterday in Tehran and Mashhad. So it's continuing. And this is really in order for the Islamic Republic to uphold these entrenched systems of power that have segregated and oppressed women for 44 years, to deny them, these girls, the right to health, the right to education, and the rights to dissent.
And I think we can see some images here of some of this going on in the streets. I mean, it seems so shocking that, as we can see there, girls are being gassed in the streets in the country in which they live. It's so disturbing. I suppose after everything you've been through and everything you've been following about what's happening in Iran, do you feel this is getting worse? Is it becoming more dangerous?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge that the girls, their courage, and the women of Iran, their courage has been contagious. And yes, the women and the girls were the spark and the engine of the past 7 months, the uprisings and the revolution. But what they've managed to do is they've galvanized Iranian society at large to understand the intersectionality of gender equality and every other basic human right. And so it really has become a pro-democracy revolution. But we are failing the Iranian people. We really need to stand unequivocally by them in a similar way that we did in a unified and immediate way against Putin in Ukraine. We haven't done that for the people of Iran against the Islamic Republic.
When you speak to Western leaders, though, what do they tell you? I know you've been at the UN, you've been right around the world campaigning on this. You know, when you ask the Iranian government about it, they say, well, Iran's an Islamic country. These are our conservative values. So what do you hear from Western leaders when they've given that answer to the international community? What do Western leaders then say to you?
Well, the Islamic Republic has been very good at selling this point of these are cultural differences. The people of Iran are risking their lives to prove and debunk this idea that they've been fed, that the world has been fed. The Western world should understand that the Iranian people are risking their lives to stand up for their rights against this oppression. No cultural norm it requires to be upheld by force, you know, with batons and threats of imprisonment.
I mean, people watching might think, oh, well, things have always been like this in Iran. But actually, we can see some pictures of your family when they lived in Iran and the normal freedoms, liberal. You can see, I think that's your parents' wedding, yeah, beautiful photographs. What goes through your mind when you look at images like that now?
I mean, what I want people to know is that pre-1979, the Islamic Revolution, there was a peaceful coexistence of women who wore the hijab and who didn't wear the hijab. We had the right to choose. And what the Islamic Revolution did is it set back women's rights and all human rights back decades, but particularly for women and girls, because that is really a pillar of the Islamic Republic, the segregation and oppression of women. So the legal age of marriage, for example, for women was reduced from 18 before 79 to 9 after the revolution. Yes, that was later raised to 13, but girls as young as 9 can still marry with the permission of their father or a judge.
Just finally, I just wonder, there has been a lot of discussion about the dangers for people who speak out, not just inside Iran, but also outside the country. Do you feel safe speaking up as you do?
There's a risk in it for everybody, but I want to tell people that the main risk is being taken by the people of Iran. And so I will continue my fight. And I want to urge people to support the legal definition of gender apartheid in international law. We're trying to get it defined in international law. I really want international lawmakers to proscribe the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. This is very important because of their nefarious activities, not only in the region and against the Iranian people, but because of right here in the UK, people's lives, British people's lives are in danger by the IRGC.
Okay, Nazanin, thank you so much for coming in and telling us about your work. It's been great to have you here this morning. Thank you. Now, if you want to know more about what's happening in Iran and the work the BBC has been doing to uncover some of the stories, despite being banned there, I heartily recommend a documentary made by our colleagues at BBC Persian. That's on iPlayer. It's definitely worth a watch, and you can see some of their important work. Now, in recent weeks, as we've been saying, we've heard from Labour, Tory politicians, and the leader of the Lib Dems, Sir Ed Davey, was here this week, all because this Thursday the local council elections are happening in England, some in Northern Ireland to follow in a couple of weeks. And I want to remind you, if there are elections in your area, you must take photographic ID with you for the first time, or you might not be able to vote. Let's hear now from another one of the parties fighting in these elections. Adrian Ramsay from the Greens is here with us this morning. Welcome to the studio. Now, you've talked in this campaign, as the other parties have, about housing, and you would like to put an immediate freeze on rents. But when you look at what happened in Scotland when they did that, average rents went up by 10%. So it was counterproductive.
Well, you're absolutely right that housing is the main issue being raised with me by people right around the country. People are literally being priced out of being able to afford to live in their own community, whether that's because the new homes are being built are far too expensive for people to be able to afford, or indeed for existing rental homes. Yes, prices are skyrocketing at a time of a cost of living crisis, and I do want to see policies put in place that would enable councils to put a cap on rent increases, and in the meantime, yes, we need to have a freeze on rents. That's something we called for during the winter where people were really struggling. But
if you look at the evidence where that has been done in the UK and Scotland, the average rent actually went up. It went up more than anywhere else in the country, so isn't it counterproductive?
Well, the Scottish Government's policy is actually a very recent one, and they've moved on from the rent freeze to now saying that there needs to be a cap on rents of no more than a 3% increase each year. That's happening as a result of the Green Party being part of government in Scotland, one of a wide range of achievements they've made that I'm deeply proud of, and that's about protecting people at a time of cost of living crisis from spiralling rents. And, you know, people who live in...
But rent went up when they froze it. That's what happened. That's what the evidence tells us. So why is it a good idea?
Well, it's happened in a number of other countries as well, including in Spain, where it's been an effective policy. And as I say, that was about freezing rents. It's now about putting a cap year on year on the increase in rent that landlords can charge. People who live in private rented properties pay the highest percentage of their income on housing, and we need to address that at a time of a cost of living crisis, as well as addressing all the other issues people are facing. If we look at the root causes of the energy bills crisis, for example, we have the leakiest, most inefficient homes in Europe here in the UK. People's heating literally goes out of the door, out of the window. If we went for a nationwide programme to insulate people's homes, that could keep their bills down, keep their homes warm, and create jobs across the country. But what the government's doing, its insulation policy, would take 300 years to tackle fuel poverty under its own definition at its current rate. It's glacially slow, and we need to speed up if we're going to tackle both the cost of living crisis and the climate emergency.
And when it talks about, you know, making the case for being more environmentally friendly and taking bold steps on green energy, of course, your party's called for that kind of thing for a very long time. But we've taken a look and found actually that very often when it comes to solar farms, the Green Party have locally taken a position against them. So that's just a double standard, isn't it? Nationally, you're saying we must have this kind of green energy, but then locally, actually don't like the look of it in my community.
I think you'd struggle to find many examples of that. The Green Party...
I've got three of them here. I've got Rutland, Hastings, Derbyshire, Green councillors saying, no, we don't fancy it, thanks very much.
We're very clear that we want to see more types of all renewable energy around the country. Yes, of course, in any one example of a local proposal, you need to look at the full impact. Is it adding to biodiversity in the area? Is it part of the range of mix of renewables that we need to add? And I know lots of examples where Greens are working very actively on things like community-owned renewable energy, where the community really benefits from the financial return as well as the environmental return back into their community. And then you get really strong community support for these initiatives. But it's not just about what's happening at a local level. The government has got to really step up the amount of renewable energy we're producing of all types, whether it's offshore wind, lifting the ban on onshore wind, far more tidal power, and measures to reduce our energy use through things like insulating homes that will keep people's bills down, will help address the energy crisis, because of course renewable energy is the cheapest form of producing energy these days. So why is the government focusing on new oil and gas licenses which will wreck the climate and push people's bills up?
And they would of course say that they are taking big strides towards net zero, but I know that you would say that it's not enough. Just a couple of quick final questions, if I may. I asked the others, what's a decent result look like for the Greens on Thursday night? 100 seats, someone said to me, but is that a bit optimistic? What do you think?
100 gains would be a very good result. It may be more than that. We're getting a very strong response from people on doorsteps across the country, people really fed up with this government, not inspired by Labour, looking to vote Green in increasing numbers. And across the last 3 sets of local elections, we've had record gains, which we fully expect to build on this time.
Well, let's see what Thursday brings. And will you, along with the other politicians that have sat in the chair, give homage to the King on Saturday?
Well, I think when it comes to the end of the local elections, I will be enjoying some time with my family and celebrating Green results. I will watch it because it's a key time for the nation. But I think the idea of a pledge is possibly somewhat outdated.
OK, so you won't be chanting along with some other people who've sat in that chair before you. Adrian, thanks so much. It's great to have you from the Green Party here in the studio. Now, usually at this time, we have a bit of a refresher of what we've heard earlier in the programme. But we've covered a lot of ground this morning, so we're going to close with something a bit different, because the council elections are not the only big, important, glitzy event that's on the way.
The world's biggest song contest is coming to the UK. Are you ready? Not you, May Muller. Hughes Law. It's time to show the world how we Eurovision.
You're forgetting something.
Outfits! Cheers, kidder! Bring out the glam, the fierce, the buffet. Nigella!
Don't worry, I've got it all under control.
We need flags. Loads of flags. Let them hear us in key. You ready, love?
I was born ready.
It's Eurovision.
I've got all the cheese!
It's in Liverpool.
Is it? I didn't know, sorry.
You've been living under a rock. Of course it is. Now come on! The Eurovision Song Contest. Live across the BBC.
Well, that will give everybody a bit of light relief. What are your plans for Eurovision night? Matt, are you a big Eurovision party? You got the snacks in already?
I confess I'm not, but I'm looking forward to the inevitable AI takeover of Eurovision in a couple of years' time.
Oh, would it be better than some of the current entries?
I wouldn't want to speculate on that.
Blimey, oh dear. Adrian, what about you? Are you a Eurovision Song Contest fan?
Sandy Shaw, Puppet on a String.
Ah.
That's sort of my era of Eurovision. But I love, my kids love it. They will be dancing along and dressing up and doing all the stuff.
Amazing. Well, there's nothing wrong with the classics. Nicholas, you looked completely bemused while we were playing that trailer.
I hadn't seen it before, but I think it's wonderful what it's done for Liverpool.
Yes.
And I think it couldn't go to a better place. And I think to support Ukraine and to have it in Liverpool are two really wonderful things. And I hope and believe that the whole country will get behind this as well and make it a very great evening.
OK, well, two very big events coming along for our country, as well as the local elections, which, of course, for political nerds like me, are just as exciting. Thank you, all three of you, for being with us this morning. It's been fantastic. Quite enough of Eurovision chat. Back to the business in hand, because on Thursday, millions of you will have your say on what's going on in your village or town and give a verdict on the state of our political parties. In England, at least, it is a massive test. This morning we have heard a bit about how the big parties are trying to massage their and your expectations. Local elections are, of course, what they say on the tin. They are shaped by local factors. But do not doubt that the parties will pore over every result to decipher what that means for the big picture for all of us. How solid is Labour's advantage in the national polls when you all get stubby pencils in your hands in real life in the privacy of the polling booth? And to what extent has Rishi Sunak been able to stop the rot in the Tory party? Well, armed with the results, we will next week be able to sketch the answers out to those two massive questions. I will also be here on BBC One on Thursday to take you through the night as it unfolds. So get the coffee on. Before then, you can catch up, of course, on iPlayer. But goodbye until then, and thanks for your company this morning.